Hello and welcome to the Athletic Soccer Show. This is your post-game review after Spain have been knocked out of the 2022 World Cup on penalties to Morocco. My name is Jack Collins and I'm joined by the one and only Peter Rutzler. How you doing, mate?
I'm good, thank you, Jack. I'm good. Digesting a nice big shock on a lovely Tuesday night. How are
Yeah,
you?
it is one, isn't it? I think this is it. It's funny because on paper this isn't a shock in that it's group winners knocking out group second place. But it is in terms of how these games have panned out and how this tournament has panned out. And it seems like a long time ago that Spain won that first game 7-0 against Costa Rica, and all those worries about lack of firepower seem to have been cast into the wind. Morocco, on the other hand, drew that first game 0-0, and since then have relatively grown into this tournament, I think, to a point where them going through and being in the quarterfinals, and obviously we don't know who they're facing yet because Portugal plays Switzerland later on, doesn't feel that weird. And it wouldn't feel that weird if they won that game, I think, because this is a team that is incredibly well built across the course of its 11. Maybe there's a little bit of lack of depth, but generally they're a very good side. It was an interesting game, though, I think, Peter, the way that it kind of panned out, in that Spain had all of the ball, as we've seen before, but in this regard, didn't really create much clear cut. All the big chances in this one fell Morocco's way, I thought.
Yeah, they did. I mean, it wasn't a change in style. We've seen Spain play like this, and what's been so encouraging about Morocco, and I think we've talked about them before, is one, the way they set up the strength, which is balanced across the team. You don't have one set area that you think, that there could be flaws here. It's very nicely balanced, playing in a system that really suits them, playing with a lot of energy, a lot of flair. Obviously, that flair tapered as the game went on because to defend against the way Spain are playing is exhausting. Constantly having to keep your shape, constantly having to concentrate, make sure there are no gaps. And I think that's probably testament to just how impressive Morocco have been, because when you're in the embers of 120 minutes, and we did start to see a few more chances for Spain, as the game wore on, they were still clear, making every last clearance, those vital interceptions. Sofian Amrabat was unbelievable in holding midfield. I mean, he's done his stop the world of good in this tournament overall, actually. And you're right, Spain did not create very much at all. What was it? I think it's 1,000 passes and one shot on target, which kind of sums things up a little bit in terms of that bluntness once you get to the final third. I mean, it's defense. It depends how you look at this style. Defensively, fine. They've generally, they've kept a clean sheet. They've kept the opposition chances down. But as you said, Morocco probably edged it in terms of quality chances. I mean, Shadira could have had a hat trick when he came off the bench in extra time.
And that was just in extra time. Yeah.
Yeah. So absolutely, it's that's the thing. It was not an undeserved defeat. We were saying before we came on here, it's not that massive a surprise because it's a carbon copy of what happened 4 years ago, and that's the outcome. I'm a little bit pleased because when we did our preview show, I mentioned when we were talking about Golden Boot winners that I thought Spain could just get into trouble in the group stages, and then obviously they beat Costa Rica for 7, and you think, okay, maybe I've got this a bit wrong, but no, that prediction has sort of come to fruition, so I'll keep that.
I think there's a couple of bits about this, but I want to touch on various aspects of it. And I think one of the really important ones is that you say it's a bit like a carbon copy of 4 years ago, because I think that's how it felt. And that's how it felt at long periods during the game as well, because the closer this got to penalties, the more Spain pushed for this winner. To the point where we saw both centre-backs in the box in the sort of 118th minute and the 119th minute. We saw Spain go, right, we want to win this. We want to win this in extra time. And the more that happens, I always think it's usually the team. Obviously, they were the team in the ascendancy on possession, and I use ascendancy in inverted commas there, but the Morocco goal was relatively under siege for the last 10 minutes of extra time. And I do wonder if that's to do with the fact that Spain were like, we don't want this to go to penalties. We have no interest in these going to penalties whatsoever. And then obviously we have seen that the repeat. They went out in the round of 16 to Russia last time around. Obviously, it was the hosts in that regard. But it felt like a bit of a Morocco home game in parts today. The stadium was very much, I would say, 90-10 in favor of Morocco. And those fans have been so brilliant throughout the tournament that they were the ones whistling throughout as Spain kept the ball. You know, when you're getting whistled in the 115th minute, we're like, lads, we've had 75% possession. Can you give it a rest? But it does feel like, you know, it was one of those where Spain, under that cosh, have been unable to produce in the final third again, and unable to carve clear-cut chances when people have just blocked out the middle. And we saw various elements of it today. You know, Pedri playing at right back for long periods of the first half in order to try and get him on the ball. I assume that was to try and free Marcus Llorente to get into the box, to kind of make third man runs and kind of attack aerial balls, because they had no joy whatsoever from anything that was stood up into the box to begin with. And all of those kind of things made you think, right, how is Spain going to force an opening here? And it just all felt a bit sloppy.
Well, when you can't break through the lines in the way they probably want to, in terms of those line-breaking passes in behind, having that runner getting in beyond, and that's, as we were saying before, that's a lot that's down to the work of Morocco off the ball. Then you're going to start resorting to crosses, and when you don't have that focal point, it's more difficult. And Morata, you know, he did offer that once he comes on at the hour mark, but he's not quite that. He's not quite that person you want to hit with those deliveries. It's funny you mentioned about right back, because obviously Marcus Llorente's come in at right back, and you think, well, they could do with one, a Madrid-born fullback. There happened to be one on the pitch, but he was playing the other team and was absolutely exceptional. And the beautiful, sweet narrative of him scoring the winning penalty as well. It's not lost. But I agree in terms of setup. I think this is the dilemma. You know, this is the question. It's what is. I don't want to say plan B because it seems very reductive. That's not quite what I'm saying here. But at the same time, is it a case of, is it a stylistic point that Spain cannot then alternate the way they want to play? Is it because they don't have the personnel? You know, we're talking about Morata here. Is it because they're not playing to his strengths, or they just can't find anyone who can do that kind of role? Has the game moved on to a point where if you're going to play like this style, like they did when they won the tournament, you know, is that conceivable in the modern game with teams pressing smartly? I thought Morocco's off-ball set position was so solid, so impressive. And the thing is, even as the game wore on and they were forcing into changes, Aguer's come off at centre-half. Saiss has gone off at centre-half and he's come back on with, you know, like, I don't know what his hamstring will be like. I don't know how he carried on, to be honest. But that's at no stage was that really exploited, or really tested. And the question is that personnel or is it style?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really good point, and I think it comes back on what happens next for Luis Enrique, because you look at this and you think, right, this is a team that you set out, and it's not necessarily your style per se, but it's your style in that it's the style you've decided to continue with, and we are seeing, I think, a return to an element of teams looking for a number 9, an out-and-out number 9 who can stretch in behind, who's able to win aerial duels. And more we're seeing this through this tournament, that there is this tend back towards a number 9. And obviously you see it with Manchester City, who obviously play Guardiola football, which is, I assume, what Spain are aspiring to in many ways. Now, Lucho has said across the course of this tournament that he doesn't want to look at it and say that Spain are boxed into one style. They can play a number of styles and everything has been cliche, but you can see by the way they set up that they are trying to play a specific way, and you can see by his choice of centre backs, in that he picked Rodri and Laporte in there. I thought they were fine, you know, in terms of how they've performed throughout this tournament. I thought that Rodri in there solved the issue that Spain had of a real lack of physicality within their back line. I thought Llorente came in here today and I thought, well, that's a really, really physical back line now all of a sudden, from being one that we looked at as a potential weak point with Pau Torres in there, who isn't the most physical of centre-backs, and Eric Garcia, you could say the same about. Laporte and Rodri, you have no concerns about physicality, but equally, they had so much of the ball today and couldn't find those probing passes, which you'd expect two players of their calibre and playing the setup they do at club level to actually provide.
Yeah, for sure. And again, and part of that is the movement, and it's the way they want to play. It's a slower, shorter pass, possession based build up, and that's why you're going to get that. They're going to seal up to the ball, and I thought they were fine. I feel like defensively it's okay. You know, I mean, sure, Morocco had some good chances, and actually, interestingly, I think Mark Carey on The Athletic popped up with this stat on Twitter that of all the teams of the World Cup, you know, they average one of the highest XGs of anyone per shot conceded, at like 0.15, which, sure, they're not conceding many, but the ones they do concede are quite notable.
Good chances.
Yeah, good chances. And that said, they've still not conceded realistically, I mean, they defensively were very solid. And this is the thing, this comes back to the whole philosophy of juego de posición, and what, Pep Guardiola wants to espouse is you defend with the ball. And Spain defend with the ball pretty well. And that's why you can afford to have someone like Rodri in there, who's a very intelligent footballer, can drop into midfield, can play those passes. I feel like the considerable issue today was how much of influence that Pedri and Gavi were able to have on the game. And partly that's, the way Morocco were playing and just completely condensing the space around Sergio Busquets, really not letting Spain knit those passes together where suddenly they're in the pocket in front of the back four, asking questions of their back line. Do you commit or do you step? And no real stage that ever happened. And if your back four is protected like that, and there's no other alternative, no number 9 for you to hit to go long, and Spain will never do that, then you can be quite comfortable. And there were long passages in this game where Spain had the ball and Morocco were pretty comfortable out of possession. And I don't want to be this as too much of a criticism of Pedri and Gavi. This is the way they play. It's the Barcelona way of playing. And part of it will be experience. They're still so young. We have to still remember that. But when you're in that environment, you need those players in that pocket around Busquets to really step up, to really try and take hold of the game and to get past a man, just to create those little overloads in space, which didn't happen. Morocco, on the other hand, were able to do it, particularly Boufal in that first half. There's the one example where he beats Llorente, which is a classic example of a defender. You keep your eye on the ball. Boufal doesn't. No leg goes over the ball or anything. He's just shaking his hips and moving his feet, and he's gone. It's not great, but that was kind of the difference. Morocco had those moments where they could beat a man, and suddenly they're in, or pretty much, and maybe they lack that a bit. I think that why players weren't involved at all today, really, for Spain. Dani Olmo had a really quiet game by his standards, and that's why you just need that extra edge, that alternative option to trying to thread the needle if you can't thread it.
Yeah, I think this is it, and I think it's a really interesting point because it did feel like there was no one on the. I can't pick out a player here in the Spain team where I went, "Oh, you had a really good game." Like no one, and I think there were perfectly loads of players who played fine, but no one that I went, "Oh, you had a really good game." I have a plus next to every single one of the Morocco back four and Amrabat in front of them. They controlled where they needed to be. The lines were so tight together. They were sweeping up anything that happened. And across the course of it, Mazraoui and Hakimi getting forward as well. This wasn't they have to sit in and tuck in and make sure that nothing goes past them. It was how can we get out when we do get the ball? Those two flying forward, causing all sorts of problems for Spain down the wings. And I just thought it was generally one of the most complete counter-attacking, if you will, performances that we've seen so far. Yes, there aren't goals, but in terms of causing problems, in terms of not hugely being troubled, especially in the 90 minutes, I think in the extra time there was a bit more of that as Spain's finally started to get a bit of wear and tear out of the defense. But generally, as counter-attacking performances go, this is the benchmark, and you look at that and go, well, if Morocco play like that, lots of teams are going to really struggle to break them down. Not least the fact that if it's whoever comes out of this kind of semi-final, this kind of round of 16 tie of Portugal and Switzerland are going to struggle against Morocco, I think, because if they play like that, there's no easy way to go through them.
No, absolutely not. I mean, we've seen it in the group stages as well, the way they played against Belgium, the way they played against Croatia in terms of controlling that game, the attacking flair that they could produce against Canada in those early stages. They are finally balanced as we start this discussion on, and that makes them a dangerous opponent. I think it's fantastic for the tournament. It's fantastic to see atmospheres like that, and for a team to get that kind of backing. And as you say, they will pose problems for anyone. And this is the thing. I mean, when you watch back that game, I was never that comfortable with Bono in goal. I mean, he's had a fantastic penalty shootout, and we'll get onto the shootout in a second, I'm sure. But there are always those moments of slight concern, and at no stage does Spain really trouble him. And I guess that kind of plays into the number 9 point. Does that change with a team that goes, hold on a minute, let's put Olivier Giroud, let's put some balls up to Olivier Giroud and see what he can do against him? Ask more questions. This is it. They didn't ask enough questions of Morocco, partly because of the way Morocco set up, but also because when it got to the final third, they didn't have the answers.
There's also the question of the fact that, obviously Spain have got number 9s. Then they might not be the number 9s in the entire world who, but you look at Borja Iglesias, who is having himself an unbelievable season at Betis, and who has been in the Spain national team. He was called up in September, for those games against Switzerland and Portugal. And you go to those kind of moments and you go, right, okay, you have a number 9 who is performing like this in the league, who is a physical player who can also get in behind. He has all the capabilities of being an all-round number 9, and you haven't brought him because you have decided that his skill set is not something that you need in this team. And that's where questions, I think, can be asked of Lucho, because you need to be able to mix it up. Now, I appreciate that if he's not going to do that, there's no point bringing him. So, but the fact that he called him up into the 2 games beforehand, and you look at Hansi Flick and his use of Niklas Füllkrug, who, yes, Germany are out, but Füllkrug showed that he could be an effective weapon, especially when games weren't going their way, in order to make things happen. You go, right, well, look what they did to you. And can you do that to someone else if you have the options available to you? And the options weren't there because Spain decided to go with the particular profile of number 9 in their squad, and that profile was simply Alvaro Morata.
Yeah, no, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I was going to mention about Hansi Flick and having that alternative, trying them out, because there will be games like this. This is the World Cup, is knockout competition. And this comes into the discussion about Spain's style. If you play a 38 league game season playing the way they do, I'm sure they'll probably win it. I can imagine them picking up a good amount of points. That quality will shine through. On average, they will win games like this. This isn't a league season.
Right in the
You're not going to get that time. Yeah, well, exactly. And this is a knockout. This is knockout, and that's where that variation, the chaos of football. And sometimes you've got to play to it. You've got to create your own and master it. And you can't tame the beast in the way Spain want to do in possession. And they got unstuck today against a good team. And that's made the difference. And ultimately it's a shootout. And as much as Enrique said before the game that he asked all of his players to take 1,000 penalties. In that atmosphere, and that's where it comes in as well. The penalties were terrible, and I think we've seen a trend.
Yeah, there's 3 really bad penalties. Yeah. Well, I said this yesterday. I thought that Japan's 3 penalties, 3 or 4 of the Japan penalties were absolutely among the worst I've ever seen. You can add these 3 to it. I've just seen some side tweet that if there was a Spain penalty shootout, it might never end, which is a fair point, I think, at this exact moment. But look, you saw that the ability of, and we're seeing this more and more. And I talked to Michael Bailey about this yesterday. He was saying that there's this trend of players waiting to see where the goalkeeper goes, and we saw that with all 3 of the Spain penalties. We saw that with almost none of the Morocco penalties, and maybe there's a difference there in that obviously Ziyech whacks it straight down the middle. You go, right, okay, no one's going to stay there. There's no keeper in the world that's staying still in a penalty shootout. You'd be lambasted. And then obviously Hakimi has the nerve to Panenka the last one straight down the middle as well. And you go, right, well, these are an element of what you're doing and you're putting exactly where you want to put it. And I think that there is something in that at the moment where everybody is starting to try and wait to see where the keeper goes. Keepers know this, and we've seen it with Lewandowski. Obviously, he missed the first one, got the second one in that game against France. But whatever happens there, you don't get a second go in a penalty shootout. And if you know what you're going to do and you hammer through it, I think there is an element of conviction that leads itself to be like, if it's a brilliant save, it's a brilliant save. But the conviction in doing that, I think, would inspire. And England have this a bit with Harry Kane, right? He thumps the first penalty every single time, and England follows suit. And I think that there is something to be said for just putting the kind of, right, this is what we're going to do, is stick to our game plan. We're not waiting for you. We're not waiting on the keeper. There is an element of just, we have the kind of strength of our convictions.
Penalties are so much about psychology. And if your first penalty is as limp as the first one so after Sarabia hit the post, didn't he? So it wasn't too bad. It probably wasn't the worst of the lot.
It wasn't too bad a penalty, to be honest, yeah.
Yeah. I won't go too hard. But even so, you miss that first penalty, you're on the back foot, the mood change, especially in an atmosphere like we saw tonight. You're then going up to take the next one, and you're taking a penalty that is based on reading the goalkeeper. There's no real margin for error here. If the keeper calls your bluff, you are, for all intents and purposes, screwed. And this is the difference of, say, taking a penalty potentially in a game. And a lot depends on game state. I mean, it's so much harder than if you go, right, I've got my penalty. I know I'm going to stick this bottom right corner. I'm going to put my foot through it. And I practiced it 1,000 times, as Enrique said they had. That's, maybe there is more of a science to it. Maybe I'm being too belittling here of techniques, but it just feels like in these high pressure situations, you need to reduce different elements of stress upon you. You know, they talk about how with England, when they first won the shootout against Colombia in the round of 16, how they got someone in, and one of the things they would do is once the whistle goes, take a breath, don't rush it, regain control of the situation. And I suppose there's an element of trying to take control of it with that stuttered run up. But as I say, once you get in that situation and the keeper reads it, as you say, Jack, the keepers are far more aware of this, and they don't want to be caught out like that. You're in trouble. And penalties are fascinating. I mean, we saw it last night. Once Japan missed the first one, the momentum shifts. It's so much of it is psychology and management of that. And you can do so much training, but if that first penalty misses, it's so difficult to make it back.
Yeah, completely agree. Completely agree. Let's finish this off. Just a word on Morocco, because Navalistic here on YouTube says it'd be great to see how far they can go. The wings and the fullbacks are so pacey, and they cut the lines exceptionally. I think that's pretty much spot on, but this is such a well-balanced team. We'll go back to it. And they know exactly how they're playing. They've conceded one goal in Walid Regragi's time as manager. He took over in August. That one goal was obviously the goal against Canada, which was an own goal and a bit of a freak kind of incident in many ways. They are going to cause problems for absolutely anybody at this tournament.
Yeah, they certainly will. As we mentioned, they're a very finely balanced team. Fullbacks are fantastic. Amrabat is the chief of that midfield. He orchestrates it. He marshals the defence. In Saiss and Aguer's been very, very good. You can see why West Ham have picked him up. And they have those opportunities. And obviously took off Ed Nasseri, and you thought, gosh, maybe if Ed Nasseri's on the pitch, he might have taken one of Chadira's chances. But Chadira, I mean, it wasn't the best sub. But he still worked. And I think that's the bottom line with this team is how they work together as a unit. You pointed out they've only conceded one goal under the new manager, and that collective spirit is obvious, which is clearly lacked beforehand with players who have fallen out of the national team. Zic is the obvious one, but it's quite clear that they're all pulling together and they have the right balance between flair and structure. I've mentioned Boufal before, the way he can beat players one-on-one, particularly in this kind of environment and knockout tournament. I think it's perfect for him. Ziyech has really had an influence. Doesn't always score, doesn't always get the assist, but he's having that support of such fantastic fullbacks really makes a difference. It's like, unleashing the hounds in one respect when you're on the counter attack. And they Belgium struggled to score against them, Croatia struggled to score against them, Spain struggled to score against them. They have shown themselves to be a solid unit. I do have my reservations about the keeper. I do think if you change the way you approach them, maybe you can get at them. But yeah, not going to be easy. And the confidence they will take from a performance like tonight will be extraordinary.
Yeah, well, everybody's new favorite underdog in the World Cup, I think, is Morocco. But on that bombshell, we're going to leave it there. And all that's left for me to do is say thank you so much for tuning in to the Athletic Soccer Show today. Thank you so much, Mr. Peter Rutzler, as well.
No, thank you, Jack.
I will see you later, Peter. We'll be discussing Portugal against Switzerland. I'm very much looking forward to it.
On the bench,
we will see you then, everyone. Ronaldo on the bench. Here we go. See you later.